welcome along to this Negotiating the New Normal session. This is the fireside chat that I'm going to be having with Indra Adnan. And she's going to be talking about the cosmolocal consciousness and the soft power agenda. And if you were to describe Indra in one word, you could choose variety. The child of a Dutch mother and an Indonesian father, her family moved to the UK when she was 3. She says she's never had a career as such. She does what's in front of her, and it's led her to do some extraordinary things. They've included speeches at NATO on the soft power agenda, qualifying as a psychosocial therapist, and in 2017, she launched the Alternative UK. That aims to help people drive the changes they want to see in their communities for themselves. She says, when the story among the vast majority of people is that they are powerless, to help create conditions where they can begin to feel their power again is the first step to us rescuing ourselves. It's a joy to be negotiating the new normal with Indra Adnan. Welcome, Indra.
Oh, thank you so much for a lovely introduction. I think you hit the nail on the head there.
Fantastic. Well, it is a shame that we can't meet in person, but we do have a fire for this fireside chat all the same, so I hope you're feeling cozy.
Oh, I am indeed.
So let's get straight into it. And I think the title of this session, well, it's certainly unique. I think we could do with getting some definitions so we're all on the same page. What do you mean, firstly, by cosmolocal consciousness?
Okay, so simply put, it's the age in which every human being can be acting locally while thinking globally. Now, that's not quite the same as the old local global, which used to mean some sort of relationship between global corporations and people on the ground. Today, every one of us has access to the whole of the internet. In other words, we can pick up ideas, thinking, conversations from anywhere in the world and apply the very best of human ingenuity right where we live. That's the foundations of cosmolocal consciousness.
Thank you. And what about soft power?
And soft power is a term that was invented by Joseph Nye about nearly 30 years ago now. And it was useful to me for making a distinction between hard power, which we would understand as guns and money, and something else. What is the something else that soft power could be? And the way that Joseph Nye described it was, you should remember, in the age of just after the Vietnam War, where America had failed to defeat a tiny country in Southeast Asia. And they needed some sort of compensatory idea of their continuing dominance of the world. And the way that Joseph Nye described it was, we'll always have soft power, and that is the power of our attraction. So the attraction that he was referring to was the American dream, that they could, through Hollywood, through the global media, they could keep peddling the idea that only in America could you become free and anybody could become president. And in some ways, they have proved that. But as you might imagine, the concept of soft power at that time is now diminishing. What I've wanted to do since Joseph Nye and since working with him over a period of time is to define soft power as a new form of what I would call narrative power, the power of storytelling. What they have in common is this idea that through relationship with others, telling a story about ourselves, a new kind of power is released. Sometimes that's associated with the sort of thing that women do, but I wouldn't say it's exclusively a female thing.
It's really fascinating to hear the history of that, and we'll go on to hear more about how that is applied now and will be applied in the future. But I'm keen to start at the beginning and discover what experiences formed your passion to galvanize citizen collaboration and uproot political powerlessness. You've said before that the most enabling thing in your life was, in fact, a trauma. Would you mind talking us through that?
Right. Okay. So I think the trauma that you're referring to, which we haven't really discussed, might be the very earliest experience that I had when I was just before my 11th birthday. And it was when my I woke up in the middle of the night, and my mother was in a terrible state. And what was going on was that we'd heard that my brother had been in a terrible car crash. And that night, I spent the whole of the night praying, actually, to God that he would survive. And he didn't survive that night. And I think what we're referring to here is the point at which I began to see that the big question in life is, where does our power lie? Where is my agency? What happened to my family in my teenage years was there were many, many deaths. My mother had 7 brothers and sisters, and they 6 of them died of cancer while I was a teenager. And what that compelled me to do throughout my teenage life was to really find some sort of relationship with life that could be more than material, that could be more than the accumulation of goods, that could be more than what I later understood as hard power. How could we develop our agency as human beings on this earth in a way that made us feel that we had some control over our lives? So I think, I hope that's what you were referring to, Adam, when you were talking about the early trauma. What it set me off on was a lifetime of understanding who we are as human beings, what kind of power and agency we can have, and what is the source of that? And therefore, how can we answer the really fundamental questions of how can my life be better? How can I create value? How can we connect, if you like, our inner lives to the health of the planet? Like massive questions like this. So you might then be asking, what has that got to do with politics? But let me hand it back over to you.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you, first of all, mentioning all that you did. Yeah, I was looking for you to talk through, how is it that you can be so enabled by a trauma? And I think you've summed that up well. And I'm interested to hear about some further formative experiences that have helped shape your life and what you do today. And I know that something that really shaped what you do today is the time you spent in Indonesia in your early 20s with your uncle. What happened on those trips?
Well, thanks, Adam. Yes, so I would say that while I was a teenager, I was pretty lost, and it was actually not an easy place to be in the UK. I was born in Holland. My father was Indonesian. We had quite a privileged life. I won't say that we had a hard time, but I found it hard to find an identity. When I finished college, I went back to Indonesia to try and find if I had any roots there at all. And I joined a Buddhist group that one of my distant uncles was running. And because I'd heard that they were making some sort of waves in Indonesia. Now, Indonesia, as many of you will know, is 93% Muslim country. But this was a Buddhist group, and I was wondering what was going on there. In fact, I was more or less a rookie journalist going to find a story. And a couple of times I accompanied them into the villages outside of the main cities, places where only the army visited. And they visited to bring food and to bring supplies to people who were maybe an hour or so away from water and were living in rather barren spaces. It was a very interesting period of time in Indonesia where during the military rule, the whole of Indonesia, which is 13,000 islands, had been connected up with networks that were bringing food supplies and so on to the people. It wasn't easy really to understand from outside of Indonesia, but on the inside, there was quite a lot of gratitude for that sort of network building happening. And yet at the same time, people were quite apathetic and not able to do very much for themselves. And on one of these trips to a place called Talawa, actually, a small village just outside It was in the mid-Java. The first time we visited, it was just people gathering out of curiosity, really. And the Buddhist leader that I was with giving a lecture, doing a little bit of study with everybody together, but mostly bringing people together, hearing from them and chanting. I couldn't understand really what he was talking about. It was all in Indonesian and I couldn't speak Indonesian, but I just had this, could hear this rhythmic tone of his voice. And every now and then he would say, ada, and that means there is. And afterwards I asked him, what was he saying to the people? He was saying that basically the message is, you think you have no power. You do. You think there are no resources. There are. You think there is no hope. There is. So everything he was doing was really just confirming that the answer lies with you, the people. It was quite an extraordinary thing to witness and take care, sort of just observe. And 3 months later, we went back to this village. And in that very short space of time, they'd found a way to bring water to the village in a regular fashion. They'd started to plant seeds in the garden. They had built a road from the village to the nearest station. It was something that it was a sort of an extraordinary thing to witness, that somehow these people had woken up to themselves and to their own power. So that was something that I held as an extraordinary, if you like, exotic experience. And then I went back to the UK and it sort of stayed with me, but I didn't know how to apply it. And now, if one was to cut forward 30 years, I would say I'm seeing those experiences everywhere.
Wow, that's fascinating. And is that because you've manifested them into your life, or do you think that's coincidental? What is it?
Well, there was a journey between now and then, right? So I'll try to go quickly through it, given we've got only a little amount of time. After I came back from Indonesia, I did a number of things. I mean, part of the time I was working as a journalist, part of the time I was working in a theatre as a theatre producer. And then I was also working to learn about this concept of soft power. And really in my early 30s, I was exploring different ideas of what power is. Eventually, I came to the point where I decided I must go and study politics, and I did my master's degree in politics. And then I got onto a traditional political path. I was part of the Labour Party, part of a progressive alliance at a think tank called Compass. I even stood to be an MP. And all of this time, I felt on the outside of a political culture looking in. There's so much about the political culture that we have that is sort of not really people-centered. It's ideologically driven. It's quite cold, it's full of rooms with people sitting at the front talking, with people listening in rows. There's not much in the way of participation. And I began to notice, well, I began to notice for the first time, but I really was looking hard at the sort of inadequacy, even sham of our democracy, where we only get to participate once every 4 or 5 years, and only with a vote, and only to choose a party, of which there's only 2 really in the UK, and that binary system exists across our democratic world. So the inadequacy of it, coupled with this sense, this old experience of what happens when people come together, was always living in me. It was really just before Brexit. I'd met a politician called Uffe Elbæk, who ran the Alternative Party in Sweden. I don't know if you're familiar with him. All I knew about Uffe to start with was that he was a serial entrepreneur, that he'd run an organization called Chaos Pilots for 20 years. And that was very much focused on building people's capacity. So when I'd heard that he'd started this new party, I knew it was about human potential and people's potential. And we met at an event. He invited me over to Denmark a few times. And finally, in 2016, I was at this political festival in Bornholm just before the referendum. And it was there
That's the EU
at
referendum.
the European referendum. Yeah, sorry. So I've skipped over quite a lot of time, but just to keep going with it so that we can get to the point of the alternative. I was on Bornholm, experiencing the alternative for the first time, which was just a new kind of politics, full of what I would call soft power, meaning it was all about people and relationship. It was very vital. It was exciting and creative, and that it was very arts driven. You know, at the end of every day, they'd invite a bunch of artists to sum up what had happened in that political festival on the day. So you had an opera singer and a dancer and a comedian, and they would sort of try to sketch out what had happened today in that political festival. And I was having, really, I could say, a whale of a time thinking this is something quite different. When the news came that Jo Cox had been murdered in the UK.
Yeah.
And it was such
just to help, because we've got an international audience.
Yes, of course, yeah.
Let people know. So Jo Cox was an MP for the Labour Party, who not long before been elected for the first time, and she had been campaigning to remain in the EU for the UK in the months leading up to her death, which was very tragic, sent shockwaves across the country and beyond. And you felt it over there in Denmark at the time.
Yeah, well, it was extraordinary. In a way, the whole island went into a sort of mourning. This sense that it was very clear to us that a certain kind of politics polarizes people and creates anger and frustration instead of bringing people together. And that at the really extreme, in the worst cases, something like this can happen. That somebody can be quite driven mad, if you like, by the frustration and anger against the so-called other side of the political divide, and even take up arms to express that anger. And that's what had happened only 5 days before the referendum. So it was at that moment that I decided I had to jump ship from the old politics and start something new. And together with my partner, Pat Kane, we started up a new political platform. We didn't copy Denmark's model, which was to start a new political party, because in the UK, we have this first past the post system, which is not a proportional system. So we felt there was no way that starting a new political party would help us to achieve the goals that we were now trying to give rise to, which is more or less to translate people power into a new politics. That's really why we started the alternative, and it's 3 years now since we started that. And ask away.
Yes, well, please tell us some of the things that the alternative does.
Yeah, so we do 3 things. If you think now about going all the way back to Lawa in Indonesia and the lessons that I'd learned around agency, and the lessons from soft power, which were to do with how influential or how key is the telling of stories to the outcomes, if you like. If you can tell a new story about what is going on for people, you'll get new outcomes. And the proof of that is the way that the media influences our behavior, or the way that advertising has influenced our behavior, or even how now in the age of the internet, even a very small group of people can change the thinking and the policy of governments all over the world. So the power of storytelling is absolutely core to what we're doing. So for that reason, the first thing that we did was establish a daily alternative. And it started with the fact that only 2% of people are in fact members of political parties. And yet that 2% are shaping the entire political discourse that the media are feeding on. So we thought, what happens outside of that 2% bubble? What's happening in the 98%? And when we really started to look outside of the mainstream political bubble, we saw that there are so many solutions to the multiple crises that we face that are making small impacts here and there, but because they never really reach the mainstream of our attention, they're finding it very hard to grow and become really impactful on the multiple crises that we face. So every day in the Daily Alternative, we're highlighting one of these solutions, and they have three sort of domains. One is the stories about human and social development. The second is the stories about our power, our collective power. And the third is what's going on in the world out there. The way that the global sphere is described by our mainstream politics is mostly from a national perspective, looking outwards. You know, we're looking at the rest of the world, we're choosing our friends and making alliances with them, and the rest of them are a threat to us in some way. So what we wanted to do was really highlight the oneness, if you like, of the human story, and to be able to bring people into better relationship with things going on all over the world that are reflecting their needs and values and so on at the same time. So this Daily Alternative is the first thing that we do. The second thing we do is that we work, we identify the people that we believe are building a new social, political, economic system. Because one thing we're quite conscious of is that you can't have a new politics unless you have a new social economic system that it can serve. So we're looking for who are those people giving rise to those things, and how can we help them to collaborate and to meet each other more, so that this new system, as Buckminster Fuller would say, don't bother fixing the old one, build the new one. Who is building the new one? Let's pay more attention to those people and drive collaboration between them. And then the third thing, which maybe is the thing that most people align with, is the building of what we call citizens' action networks on the ground. So citizens' action networks are, it almost speaks for itself, but people will immediately say, what is the difference between a citizens' action network, a CAN, and just ordinary community organizing? And what we're saying is it's a carefully designed, curated coming together of people, so that you're really crossing the political and cultural divides, really bringing all the people in their most in their best diversity, if you like, together into a space where they're not only meeting each other in a sort of flat but friendly way, but they're also meeting this cosmolocal new system arising in their midst. So in a way, a citizens' action network is a container, if you like, for the best of people's power, cosmolocal people's power. And the reason we really want to emphasize the importance of CANs is because our sense is that we're not going to be able to change our future if we keep allowing people power to be co-opted, if you like, by the current party political system. We really need a parallel system where the people themselves can devise their own solutions, come into real relationships of trust with each other, connect globally, and start to pull everything in a new direction. So at the local level, this would look like a partnership model between, say, the local council and a CAN. But really what needs to happen now is that it needs to happen all the way up the municipal level and also at the national level. Perhaps we could open the People's Parliament to be in constant dialogue with the government as we know it. So this is our bigger picture of how a single person waking up, moving into relationship with others, waking up around them in their community, building CANs, occupying this parallel system. This is an alternative politics that we're working towards.
Yeah, well, this is where I really come alive as well, listening to you talk about this. And it's really, everything you've said so far has resonated with people deeply, even as far away as Malawi. Messages are coming in. Hello, John in Malawi, who's got in touch to say that he's enjoying this. And telling a new story leads to new outcomes, and the evidence is from how media influences our behavior. This is so powerful. Another comment there from Lipsa. These citizens' action networks, they're so nourishing, aren't they, in many different ways? So just to give you a brief outline of my background a little bit. For the last 4 years, I've been the executive director, la-di-da, of Ambigo. Ambigo is a not-for-profit that works to strengthen community cohesion by bringing people together, like you say, in their diversity, in order to support each other's personal goals, ideas, and ambitions. So people come along with selfish intent to get help for their own thing. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. We all want to get helped with what we want to do. But then as soon as they're in the space, it's created and with a soft touch so that people are helping each other all the time, simply by sharing their knowledge, their ideas, their advice, and their contacts. And what happens is people forget about serving themselves, and all they want to do is help each other. And in that space, you get that oneness, because there's that power of reciprocity. I can never say that word. It's
reciprocity.
Reciprocity. Thank you. And with that, you forget about that individuality and you gain that oneness as well. I wonder if you could just paint a picture a bit more of what the world looks like that you hope that these cans can play a part in creating.
Yeah, I mean, the magic factor and what makes this moment so unique is that one Citizens Action Network taking shape in somewhere like Plymouth or Stoke or anywhere in the UK can connect with CANs, Citizens Action Networks, starting up anywhere else in the world. This is the moment for me where we can start thinking about quantum social change. You know, so for example, just by listening and watching, we found a network in India of 400,000 neighborhood parliaments, each of which were Citizens Action Networks of their own design. It's really a pattern of people coming together exactly as you've described, and it's great to hear what you're doing. And I know we'll be working together, but they're happening everywhere. You know, if you look at something like Cooperation Jackson in Mississippi, or they're in India, they're in Africa. It's just patterns of people sort of waking up to what's possible, being able to connect cosmolocally because they are on the internet, but most importantly, moving in relationships of trust with each other, feeling this oneness that you're describing. This is, you know, once you're really occupying this, it's a very exciting time to be alive. This sense that we're living in an age of both internal and external revolution. And when I mean the external revolution, I'm talking about what technology can enable. But when I'm talking about the internal revolution, I'm talking about all the new stories of people waking up to their own potential, to their own ability to create value, everything that you've just described, from their own capacity for making new economies where they live. You know, they're not going to be completely dependent on the old growth economy that's destroyed everything. More and more, these new economies are springing up in places around the world because the people are coming together. Now, at the moment, I'm very conscious. I'm sounding very, you know, it suddenly looks like this incredible vision that's not very well founded. But what I'm appreciating myself about talking to you, or you know, talking to a member of the neighborhood parliament in India, or something similar in Africa, is that people are really occupying these spaces themselves and telling the story in real time about what's happening to them and how they're taking part. It's not an ideology, it's not a theory of change, it's an emergence of a new kind of behavior that this is a unique moment to explore.
And we've been talking there about the power of the collective, and obviously it works much better if the diversity within that collective is recognized and embraced rather than overlooked. But you've also mentioned about people waking up to their own power. And I know you've talked about before the fact that if we are seeking to challenge to the current paradigm of political powerlessness, then we need to face our own inner shadows first. And you're a practicing psychotherapist as well. So I wonder if you can just explain why that is a necessary first step.
Yeah, and it's interesting to talk about them as shadows. I like to, when I think about the waking up aspect, the one that I think about most is if we are looking backwards at, you know, our history of civilization, if you like, and the last few hundred years, and the Industrial Revolution, and the people that we've been required to become in order to serve the economy as we know it. When I first studied social psychotherapy, which is the human givens model, I don't know if anybody here listening would be familiar. What I understood is, first of all, that we're not simply material human beings. Of course, we know ourselves as emotional human beings, but understanding that we are designed biologically designed to get a certain set of emotional needs met as our way of survival. And these emotional needs help us to become social human beings. So let me just mention a few of them. The need for status, the need for autonomy, the need for connection, the need for meaning and purpose. These things drive us. When you really understand that this is who we are as human beings, that we are constantly looking from the moment we are born to get these emotional needs met in order to be able to thrive and survive, and then consider how we get these emotional needs met in most of our developed societies. What's happened is that the advertising industry and the creatives have designed ways to get our emotional needs met through consuming, right? So we buy stuff to get our status met. We buy stuff to get meaning and purpose. This is how we've been co-opted into the work ethic and into the current growth economy, because it's found us through our emotional needs. When you understand that you are now part of a system, that you're on the hamster wheel, if you like, because that's how it has been designed, waking up to that is the first step to becoming free. To be able to find ways of getting your emotional needs met outside of that industrial system is the first step to your freedom. The other part of our design is that we have the resources to get our needs met ourselves. So we have imagination, we have memory, we have the ability to create rapport with each other. We can get all our emotional needs met by being in relationship with each other in communities. That's the other revolutionary fact. When you wake up to that, you can leave so much behind. You stop becoming part of a machine and start to become the creator of your own life. But for a lot of people, waking up to that is very painful. It can be very painful to understand that you've been working sometimes in really, shit jobs to just fulfill a function in order to be able to buy the stuff you think is going to make you happy. And it only gives you a very short amount of happiness before you need to go out and buy something else. So it's built, our way of participating in society and in the economy is built on us being addicted to consuming. Once you understand that, and you realize that you yourself can answer your emotional needs through completely other ways of acting, it can cause dismay to think of how much time you've wasted in that addiction. But it can also be an incredible waking up to what is now possible, especially in community with others.
And there's no shame in being in that place either, because it's the way the world is. It's the way the world was created by those with power. So for those people who find themselves at that junction, the words that you've just used have really resonated with them, but they don't know how to start exploring those resources that they already have. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I would say that at any point, just moving into groups of people and beginning to talk and find common ground and common desires and wishes is very much the first place to start. But if you want to go a little bit more ambitious and you've got time and vision, you'll find that there's actually models for creating citizens action networks on our website. In there's easy steps, if you like, to how to create citizens action networks where you live. But there's also citizens action networks that already exist that you could join. For example, I would say transition towns, which are scattered all over the UK and all over the world, in fact. Just look it up, transition towns, are the early days of citizens action networks. They're not the full thing. There isn't a political ambition there, but they are the beginnings of those community networks that connect the health of the human being to the health of the planet via the health of communities. And that really is what we call the I-we world axis of a new politics.
Well, I think now is a really good time to let people know about the web address for the alternative, so they know how they can find out more and get involved. So it's thealternative.org.uk. And for the benefit of the people who are in this call with us, I've just posted it in the private chat there. People joining us from all over. Daniel has joined us from Kenya.
Hi, Daniel.
A moment ago that we had somebody joining us from Georgia, Melita from Georgia in Tbilisi, somebody in Romania, all over the place. And while we're on geography, there was somebody who wanted to know about the network of neighborhood parliaments in India. They just missed the name of that. And that's from Lipsa, who says she'd love to connect with them and create platforms where she lives in the eastern part of India. So would you mind just repeating what the name of that network was?
Yeah, yes, it's called Neighborocracy. Neighborocracy. And if I can just be agile, I will put a piece about them in the chat box in a second. But yes, it's an extraordinary model where 30 homes get together to create a neighborhood parliament, and the neighborhood parliament is made out of three levels. There's a children's parliament, there's a young people's parliament, and there's an adults parliament. And in each of these, each one of them takes responsibility, being influenced by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So it's very ambitious. But think about a group of 17 or so young people, one of whom, maybe even at the age of 10 or 11, becomes the Minister for Poverty in their neighborhood. Now, this isn't a theoretical idea at all. This is for that child to think about the neighborhood that they're in and who's the person who needs help and how can we help that person. So they're thinking about poverty always in a community way, how the others can, just exactly as you described, Adam, how can we help each other, each of us, to overcome our individual problems so that we can thrive together. And this is happening all the way up to the national level. And through this neighborocracy network, they have children's prime ministers regularly, elected to be the spokesperson for the young people of that part of India. I'm just looking for in my. I'm sorry. You talk while I just look for the link.
Yes, you do that. I'll say to people that somehow we've arrived at a point where we've only got 5 minutes remaining. So if you've got a burning question for Indra, then do just drop it here in the chat and we can ask her. And if we do have time and you're lucky, we'll be able to see if she's able to answer it for you.
There's the link, by the way. Links in the chat box.
Wonderful. That's very kind. Thank you very much for doing that. Lapsy will appreciate it. So, I mean, I could ask you questions all day long, so I'll continue. I think you've already kind of half answered this question already, but for absolute clarification, in a world where cosmolocal collaboration thrives and it results in the sharing of resources and people are finding fulfillment in community, in that collective, rather than in material possessions, is there any room left for capitalism as we know it?
Yeah, I think that I mean, I'm loath and probably not even expert enough to dissect or to critique capitalism in a way that would satisfy anybody here who has made it their study in some way. But if we're talking about capitalism as the flow of money, or we're talking about the human practice of capitalizing, then I would say that it could be adapted. It can be made to work in a people-powered system. There will always be a need, I think, to have a currency, to have ways of looking and working with money, but it can be so different from the way that it has happened until now. I don't think that it's not my intention to create clear binaries between, for example, relationship and capital. It's more to do with how a newly connected and alive people-powered system would use money differently. How we would, design a different kind of currency that is more fluid and more responsive to the needs and the imaginations and creativity of people. Not to outlaw capital altogether. I think it's not necessary, but also just in a sense, for me, this idea that these are black and white issues is very much something that I would avoid. Does that make sense?
100%.
Yeah.
And from what you've described around the citizens' action networks as well, it feels to me as if that would be a collective decision anyway. It wouldn't be down to any one person involved in the movement to say capitalism bad, no, or whatever. So yeah, no, that really does make sense. We've got a question here. We've literally only got 1 minute left now. Can you believe it? But I don't know if you've ever visited Nigeria, but Ayomide, and I really apologize if that's not how you pronounce your name, but Ayomide says, what can you say would be the best way to bring about social change in a society like Nigeria? Reforms or revolution?
I'm not sure, Ayomide. I'm sure I'm not saying your name right, but I'm not sure that you could have useful reforms without some form of revolution, or any revolution that wouldn't bring about reform. So again, I'm avoiding the binary nature of those two things. Let's say if it starts with an inner revolution and the waking up of people to their own resources and their ability to create and design for themselves, then you will need to create structures, architecture, new cultures, etc., new laws, of course, that reflect those things that you are bringing into the world for the first time. My sense is, if you think about it from the position of reform, you're still looking backwards to the old system. If you're thinking about it as something new that you're initiating without looking back, as I said before, building the new system, then it's revolutionary, of course, but it's also returning to something quite natural, returning to something that's authentic. It's more to do with a return to yourself than a reform of something outside of yourself. I hope that makes sense, but it's more, if you can experience that and you're amongst people experiencing that together, the emphasis is very much on creativity and imagination. what is it that we want to see here? What is it that we can imagine happening? How can we move towards that thing? I think neither the word ultimately reform or revolution quite adequately captures what happens when people move into relationship and start to really use their own capacities well. I hope that makes sense, and I haven't just avoided your question.
Well, do let us know if you've got any follow-up thoughts there, Ayomide. I've just been told that we may have a minute or so extra, which is a pleasure for us if you're okay to stay with us, Indra. A question here, which I don't know if this falls into your many areas of expertise as well, but Anya asks, how are the digital currencies helping in here? So is that something that the alternative has explored or partnered with any kind of organizations on?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think I think the digital currencies offer a lot of opportunities to play with value exchange. So one of the ones that we've been using in our cans is called Countercoin, and what that is, it's a linking between the excess produce that's in an area. So, for example, food that's not bought, or seats on transport that aren't used, or tickets for a cinema that haven't been purchased. These become part of a supply, if you like, of goods that are connected directly to what we call countercoins. So if you do work in, this was invented in Stoke for the Countercoin project. If you do work in your local community, you get paid in countercoins, and then you can spend these countercoins on this. You know, you'll have free public transport, you'll have free food, you'll have free cinema tickets, and so on. It particularly works well with young people who you know, are pleased to do some voluntary work, but, you know, are happy to be paid. So this is one of the kind of currencies that we feel really help a community to move into relationship with itself, at the same time using up the excess of the produce in that community, bringing in local businesses as a result. It's a network building currency. It's not the same as other currencies which seem to have more free-form exchange, more disconnected with people and networks. Our preference would be for ones that actually build relationship between people. But yes, for a city or a town or even a region to have its own currency really gives the sense of their autonomy from the current growth economy, and that building of autonomy is a very important factor in the success of a CAN.
Wow, wonderful answer. Wasn't expecting that, and so much depth. Thank you so much. We are almost at the end of our time. Just want to remind people that thealternative.org.uk is the address to go to if you've been left enlightened and inspired like I have from the past 50 minutes of this fireside chat with Indra Adnan. But before you go, Indra, I've been asked to ask you, and I'll bring in Karim as well, actually, here from Weave, who's going to be taking us through the next 10 minutes. If there's one question, Indra, that you'd like to leave the participants of this fireside chat with, what would that be?
As you can see, I'm not jumping straight into there. I'm trying to just think. I think my question would be, what have you deeply always known was possible?
Wow.
Thank you, Indra.
Almost brings tears to my eyes. It actually does bring tears to my eyes. Thank you. You might not know that yet, but it's my job as a weaver to help us connect to each other and build relationships with each other. Speaking of that, we have what you could call a fledgling emergent citizen action network right here in this room.
Absolutely.
I think that that question is just so beautiful. So I love it for you to repeat it again, and then I'll ask the group to go answer that in my particular way.
Okay, so what have you deeply always known was possible?
What have you deeply always known that is possible? We would love it if you would be willing, all of you, to now answer that question. And we're going to invite you to go into a room with 3 or 4 others. So if our tech side can tee that up, 3 or 4 others, and spend, let's say 10 minutes. Love it if you could spend 10 minutes on that beautiful question, what have you always known? Oh my gosh, there it goes. What have you always known to be possible? No, deeply. No, you said it so nicely.
What have you deeply always known was possible?
Yes, that's it. I hope you have fun answering that question.